We are called to make moments that lead to lives being changed, and we've been talking about that in this series over this last few weeks. We've been talking about this fact that every single one of you are called. If you are a Christian, you have a calling upon your life. Now, that can seem kind of mysterious, like how do I know what that is? But we've really just been trying to break it down and make it simple. We have actually learned there is a difference between calling and assignment, that as Christians, we all have the same callings, that they're easy to know because all you got to do is read your Bible and you'll know the things that God has called us to do as Christians. But also, on top of our calling, we each have unique and individual assignments. So everybody say assignments. That you have an assignment that is unique to you. And last week we talked about how do I know what that assignment is? And we gave you some places to look. We said, hey, make sure and look in your heart, look at what God's put in your hands, look at what's happening in your history, and listen to what God is speaking to you in your hearing, and that's how you know what God is assigning you to do. Now today we're going to wrap up this series on the call by talking about what about those times when living out the call gets hard. How many know that living God's call for your life is not always easy, right? In fact, sometimes it's really, really difficult. In fact, here's what I know, is that oftentimes we face opposition in our lives, not because we are doing something wrong, but because we're doing something right. In fact, when you begin to live out the calling of God on your life, here is the guarantee that I can give you today, that the enemy will do everything he can to try to stop you from living out that call. That living out the calling of God, like fulfilling your assignment, man, when you're in those moments, you're going to have some times when you face challenges, when you face opposition. There are going to be moments when you have doubts. Did God really call me to do this? There are going to be times when you want to give up and quit. There are going to be times when it would be way easier to live for yourself than it is to surrender your life to the calling of God on your life. I got to tell you, I know a lot of people think, well, you're a pastor, what do you really know about it? But I'm telling you, over the years, I've experienced some really difficult times in my trying to live out my assignment. Man, I think back to the beginning of the church, and I told you at the beginning of this series how God called us here and gave us this assignment of planting this church here in Burleson. And many times you hear that story and you see what God has done. You go, it must have been easy, but let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I remember in those days when we first started, and it was just a handful of us, my family, my wife, and 2 little girls, and a couple of other families, and we would set up all our stuff in the Hughley Fitness Center on Saturday nights, and I led the worship and played the keyboard, and many times I would lead the worship, and there would be more people on the stage on the worship team than there were out in the audience during worship, and man, those times, they were depressing, and they were tiring, and there were times when I wanted to give up and quit. I can remember standing out there in that big old lobby of the fitness center, looking out those glass doors out at that big old giant, parking lot, and there's like 4 cars out there, and just going, God, would you please let somebody come tonight? Somebody that's not my parents, you know what I mean? Like somebody from the community. And oftentimes, those prayers would go unanswered, and I would feel discouraged. There were times when I'd wake up on Sunday morning, when I'd been a pastor preaching on Sunday mornings to great church, and now I just had this little handful of people. All we could do is meet on Saturday nights and couldn't even meet on Sunday mornings. I'd wake up and I'd feel so depressed, and I'd say, God, did you really call me to this? I can remember as the church got started, about 5 years in, we went through one of the most difficult times of our entire time as pastors here, where we had some issues with a staff member who had a moral affair. And I'm just telling you, like in those moments, I remember one day we were getting ready for work, and my wife and I are standing in front of the vanity in our master bathroom, and I'm so overwhelmed with I don't know if I can even keep going. And I sat down on the bathtub just there in the master bathroom. And I just tears just rolling down my face, just going, I don't know if I can even take another step. I remember my wife putting her arm around me and saying, we can go just one more day. We can make it just one more week. We can just keep going. I'm telling you, oftentimes living out the calling of God on your life is difficult. There are times when you want to quit. I'll tell you, there are a few times in 2020 and 2021, I wanted to quit. Being a pastor was hard during the middle of the pandemic and all the stuff. And do you wear a mask? Do you not wear a mask? Do you have service? Do you not have service? All the things that were going on. I'm telling you, I just wanted to go to work at Walmart. Come on, how many know what I mean? And the truth is, if you decide to live out the calling of God upon your life, I will guarantee you today there will be moments like that. That oftentimes you face opposition, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something right. And I want to talk about that for just a little bit today. In fact, as I think about that, I think about a man in the Old Testament who lived out the assignment and the calling of God for his life, a man named Nehemiah. Everybody say Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah was not a pastor. Nehemiah was not a prophet. Nehemiah was just an ordinary working man like many of you men and women in this room today. Now, he did happen to have a great job. He worked for the king. He was a Jewish man who was working for the king in the Persian Empire. And one day he went to work, and while he was at work, he heard that the people of his homeland, and the Jews in Jerusalem, that they were in disgrace because the walls of that city had been torn down and burned to the ground. And in that moment, Nehemiah received his assignment from the Lord. His heart was broken. In fact, remember last week how we talked about many times you will know what your assignment is by the things that are in your heart or the things that break your heart, right? And Nehemiah's heart was broken for the people of God in Jerusalem, for the condition of the city of God, and he knelt down and he began to cry and he began to weep, and God began to speak to him and call him to leave that palace and go back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. So he asked for permission to go back and rebuild the walls. He began to gather a team to go back and begin to rebuild the walls. But when he got there to rebuild the walls, he discovered it wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought or as he had hoped that it would be. That when he got there, a couple of guys who were up to no good started making trouble in the neighborhood. Come on, all the Gen Xers, you know what I'm talking about right there. A couple of guys named Sanballat and Tobias. Later on, another guy named Geshem started trying to make trouble for Nehemiah to stop him from trying to accomplish the assignment that God had given him. And today, I'm going to guarantee you some things today, that if you decide to follow after the calling and the assignment that God has on your life, I promise you there's going to be people, there's going to be problems, there's going to be stuff, there's going to be opposition. The enemy will do whatever he can to try to stop you from accomplishing what God has called you to accomplish. In fact, from the story of Nehemiah, I think we can see 3 guarantees that are going to happen in your life if you follow after the calling. The first one is this: the enemy will try to discourage you. How many ever been discouraged before? Come on, right? Guess what? If you try to follow God, if you try to live out the calling of God on your life, there will be moments when the enemy will do whatever he can to try to discourage you from living out that call. And that's exactly what happens for Nehemiah. We can see it in Nehemiah chapter 4 and verse number 1. Look what it says. When Sanballat heard that they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed. He ridiculed the Jews in the presence of his associates and the army of Samaria, and he said, "What are those feeble Jews doing? Will they restore their wall? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they finish in a day? Can they bring the stones back to life from this heap of rubble, burned as they are?" In other words, here's Nehemiah and his people, and they're trying to follow God, but Sanballat comes along and he tries to discourage them. He tries to say, "Who do you think you are to try to do this thing that you think God has put on your heart to do?" And if that wasn't enough, after Sanballat gets finished discouraging them, then Tobias begins to chime in. And look what he says. This is funny to me. Look what he says in verse 3. Tobias, the Ammonite, who was at his side, said, "What are they building? Even a fox climbing on top of it, he would break it down from their stone walls." In other words, basically he goes, "What y'all are building is not even strong enough that a fox could walk on the top of it." Sounds kind of silly, right? And yet what was he doing? He's trying to discourage him, trying to keep him from moving forward in the things that God had called him to do. And let me just tell you something. If you decide to follow God's calling, I'll guarantee you there will be people, there will be situations, there will be problems, there will be things that the enemy will bring to try to discourage you. Maybe some of you are here and you're going, "Man, I feel the calling of God to begin to lead my family out of debt." Man, you know what we're going to do? We're going to get down there. We're going to sign up for that financial seminar. We're going to be here for that next weekend. And man, we're going to go all Dave Ramsey. You know, come on, we're getting tattoos of Dave Ramsey on our arm. We're going beans and rice and beans and rice. Come on, we're getting out of debt, baby. And so you start saving up for that emergency fund, and you got $1,000 saved up, and you're so excited. And then the next day, the car breaks down, and it's $1,500 to fix it. Come on, you know what I mean? One step forward, 2 steps back. So many times we begin to try to follow the leading of the Holy Spirit. Maybe some of you say, man, I'm going to be a leader in my family. And man, I'm going to be the dad that God has called me to be. I'm going to be the mom that God has called me to be. I'm going to be the husband that God has called me to be. And we're going to lead our family spiritually. And we're going to pray together every morning before we go to school. Or we're going to read our Bibles together once a week. We're going to have devotional time. And you start to try to do that. And as soon as you do, what happens? Come on, your teenagers start pushing back. Come on, you know what I mean? Some of you in your business, you decide, man, I'm going to be a Christian business owner. And we're going to found this business on Christian values. And we're going to fund the kingdom of God through this business. And we're going to teach our employees good leadership principles from the Bible. And you start having those meetings and doing that stuff. And as soon as you do, you have employees that begin to quit and begin to rebel. And you begin to get discouraged. In fact, that's what the enemy wants to do. So many times as we begin to move forward in what God has called us to do, the enemy does whatever he can to try to discourage us. Maybe it's things that happen. Sometimes it's not things that happen. Sometimes it's stuff that people say. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Some of you, maybe God's going to put it in your heart to be a foster parent. You look at the world and you see these kids in foster care and you think, man, could I do something about that? And you begin the process and you tell your friends about it, or you tell your family about it, and they begin to say stuff like, you can't take care of your own kids. How are you going to take care of somebody else's kids? You start to get discouraged. Maybe some of you go, man, I'm going to change the way I'm working. Maybe I'm going to take a different job that maybe it pays a little less, but I have more time with my family. And as soon as you do that, what happens? Friends begin to say, what are you doing? Are you crazy? Why would you do that? Some of you teenagers are deciding, man, I'm going to be a follower of Jesus and stand out from the crowd. I'm going to let God use me to lead my friends to Jesus and invite them to church and start a Bible club and whatever. And as soon as you do that, all the kids around you start going, what's the matter with you? You're a Jesus freak. What's wrong with you? And the enemy will do whatever he can to try to discourage you from living out the calling of God on your life. I guarantee it. Your enemy will try to discourage you. If he can't discourage you, then notice the second thing that he'll do is he'll try to distract you. Check out what happens with Nehemiah in Nehemiah chapter 6 and verse 2. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Now, here's the first spiritual lesson of the day. Never take a meeting in a place called Ono. Guess what? Here's what's happening with these guys. Sanballat and Geshem, they know that Nehemiah is doing the work to rebuild the wall, so what do? They say, hey, come down off the wall. Come over here and meet with us. We want to talk to you about some stuff. What were they really trying to do? They were just trying to distract him from the work. And can I just tell you, when you start moving forward in the things that God has called you to do, there will be all kinds of things to try to distract you from finishing that work. Maybe some of you are leading a life group. Man, you're getting really excited about how you're pouring into the ladies in your group, or how you're building the families in your group, or you're pouring into the teenagers or the men in your group, and you sit down at your computer and you think, man, I'm going to study and get ready for the lesson and for the discussion. And so as you open it up, you think, well, maybe before I start to study, I'll just check Facebook just real quick and see what's going on there. And 3 hours later, come on, you hadn't studied. All you've done is scrolled. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Maybe some of you are serving at church, and you're doing a good job, and then all of a sudden some other opportunities come along that start to distract you. Maybe some of you, it's football season. Lord knows we can't go to church on football season. Come on, right? Because we got our team, got my fantasy team. You know I love the Lord and all that kind of stuff, but man, I got to take care of my fantasy team. And I know the people that I'm preaching to right now ain't here because they're at home watching the football games. You know what I mean? And I'm not against football. I'm just saying there are always things that will distract you from the more important things. Sometimes they're big things. Sometimes they're little things. And these guys were trying to distract Nehemiah from fulfilling the assignment that God had given him to rebuild the walls. But I want you to notice what Nehemiah did. Check it out in Nehemiah chapter 6 and verse 2. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages of the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. Check this out. He recognized that this was no good, right? They were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I am carrying on a great project and I cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, but each time I gave them the same answer. I love this. Here's these guys. They say, hey, come over here and meet us in the plain of Ono. But what does Nehemiah says? He says, oh no, oh no, oh no. Come on. I ain't coming down. I'm doing important stuff, and I can't stop the work to be distracted by you. And some of you need to hear that today. You're doing a good work in your family. You're doing a good work in your life group. You're doing a good work in your business. You're doing the work of God and all the distractions that try to come your way. But you've got to decide, just like Nehemiah did, man, I got a good work to be doing. I can't be distracted. And guess what? The enemy is relentless. 4 different times they kept at him. But each time he said, no, I'm not coming down because I got work to do. I got important stuff. This thing that God has called me to do, it matters, and I cannot come down. Everybody say, I cannot come down. Come on, say it with some attitude today. I cannot come down. Even the little things. Come on. I will not be distracted from the assignment and the calling of God on my life. The enemy will try to discourage you. The enemy will try to distract you. Notice number 3, the enemy will try to discredit you. If he can't discourage you, if he can't distract you, what will he do? He'll try to discredit you. This is exactly what happens in Nehemiah chapter 6 and verse number 5. Then, the 5th time, Sanballat sent his aide to me with this same message, and in his hand was an unsealed letter in which was written, it is reported among the nations that, and Geshem also says that it's true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt. And therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and I have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together. Now, first of all, he had already tried to get him to come down 4 times by trying to distract him. Now he tries to scare him. And what does he do? He says, hey, I got a letter in my hand. The Bible says that it was an unsealed letter. What does that mean? That meant that it was posted for everybody to see. It'd be like if I posted something on social media, or if I made a TikTok so that everybody could see. And it was filled with lies. It said that the reason Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall was because he wanted to build himself up, and he wanted to gain control, and he wanted to overthrow the king. And here's Sanballat saying, even Geshem said that you're doing this. It must be true. Come on, how many know that's the way people do sometimes? And he's trying to discredit him to keep him from finishing the work. And here's what happens, guys. As we begin to follow God and begin to do the things that God has called us to do, here's what I can guarantee. There will be people who will gossip. There will be people who will misunderstand. There will be people who will misjudge your motives. And they will say things about you out of jealousy to try to stop you. I can tell you over the years, there have been many times as a pastor where people said things that they didn't know what they were talking about. Where people posted things on social media and they had no idea what was really going on. Where people spread gossip and things to try to what? Discourage us, to try to discredit us, to try to stop us from doing the work that God had called us to do. And I'm telling you, it'll happen. There will be family members that don't understand why you're doing what you're doing. There will be people in your workplace that don't understand why you're making the decisions that you are making. But notice what Nehemiah does. Come on, check this out. Verse 8, I love it. Nehemiah sent him away with this reply. Nothing like this, like what you are saying is happening. And you are just making it up out of your head. And they are trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work and it will not be completed. But I prayed, Lord, strengthen my hands. I love this. Sometimes we try to make it so complicated. What did Nehemiah do when people were spreading gossip and trying to discredit him? But basically, he just said, what y'all said is not true, so just shut up. He prayed, and then he went back to work. What do you do when the enemy's trying to discredit you? You just say, hey, that's not true. You don't have to defend yourself. You just go, hey, I know that's not true. Everybody who knows me knows that that's not true. Now I'm going to pray, God strengthen me, and I'm going to get back to the business of what God has called me to do. So the enemy will do whatever he can. Because when you're moving forward, he wants to stop you. Oftentimes the opposition is not because you're doing something wrong, but it's because you're doing something right. Sometimes he'll use others to try to discredit you, but oftentimes when that doesn't work, he'll even try to get you to discredit yourself. This is a big one. Sometimes we're doing the work, we start getting tired. Sometimes we're being faithful, and the enemy starts talking to us in our mind and starts saying things like, man, you deserve better than this. Man, nobody appreciates what you're doing. Don't they see how you serve at that church? Don't they see all the hard hours that you're putting in up there at work? Come on, you deserve it. Come on, just do what you want, and nobody will really even notice anyway. It's not that big of a deal. Come on, doesn't that happen among pastors and leaders? We've even seen it recently. Come on, in our culture today. Pastors and leaders make decisions that end up discrediting them, losing their credibility with people, even losing their ministry, all because they decided, man, you know what, I can do whatever I want because I'm big enough now. And some of you go, well, that doesn't apply to me because I'm not a pastor, I'm not a big leader, I'm not, but you know what? It applies to all of us. Some of you, maybe you're at your work, and maybe you're going, you know what, I serve here faithfully, and I work hard, and nobody really appreciates me, and they don't pay me enough. Maybe some opportunity comes along and you have a personal expense, but you go, I'll just put it on the business credit card and charge it there. It's no really big deal until it is. And you've lost your personal integrity and discredited yourself. Maybe some of you are trying to win your friends to Jesus. Maybe some of you moms are working with the other moms in the neighborhood and you're telling them your testimony. You're telling them about Jesus. They're starting to respond. Some of them have even come to church with you and you're excited about that. But then one night they say, hey, let's all go hang out. And they want to go hang out at some place that probably wouldn't be a real good witness for you. But you think, oh, it's no big deal. I can handle it. And I'm trying to witness to these people anyway. And so you go and then there's a drink and then another drink and another drink and another drink. And before long, you have discredited yourself and ruined your witness with those people that you've been trying to lead to the Lord. Come on, you see what I'm talking about? The enemy's sneaky, and he'll do anything that he can to try to stop you from fulfilling the calling of God upon your life. And let me remind you, you don't have to be a pastor to live out your calling. It doesn't have to be some big thing. It's just walking in the assignment that God has for you. And when you begin to walk in that direction, the enemy will try to discourage you. He'll try to distract you. He'll try to discredit you, but you and I have to decide today that we will not quit on the calling of God. In fact, I love what happens with Nehemiah. Check this out. All these things have come against him to try to stop him, to try to discourage him and distract him and discredit him. But look what happens in Nehemiah chapter 6 and verse 11. It says, but I said, should a man like me run away? Should I run for my life into the temple? I will not go. Everybody say, I will not go. I will not go. I knew that God had not sent him, but that Tobias and Sanballat had paid him to prophesy against me. And they paid him to frighten me so that I would do this and sin. And they could give me a bad name and shame me. And I prayed, my God, remember Tobias and Sanballat and what they have done. And remember the prophetess and the other prophets who have been trying to frighten me. Verse 15. And the wall of Jerusalem was what? Was completed on the 25th day of the month of Elul. It took 52 days to rebuild. And when our enemies heard about it and all the nations all around us saw it, they were shamed and they understood the work that had been done with the help of our God. Check this out. All the things that came against Nehemiah, but Nehemiah said, I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to face it. I'm going to keep doing the work. In fact, at one time, they were standing on the wall and the armies were coming against them. And the Bible says that they were working on the wall with a hammer in one hand and a sword in the other hand, saying? Because they said, I will not be stopped from doing what God has called me and assigned me to do. I'm not running away. I'm not quitting. I'm going to keep going until I finish the work. And what happened? In 52 days, the wall was completed. The work was done. It was a miracle. In fact, we just finished a series called Miracles, and I loved that series because we talked about the miracles of Jesus and the things that he did. Like oftentimes, like he would just touch somebody, and as soon as he touched them, their eyes would be open. Or he would speak a word. Just by speaking a word, they would be healed. And I love it when the supernatural stuff happens. In fact, that's the kind of stuff that happened all throughout the Old Testament. I mean, dry bones were being raised, and I mean, just supernatural stuff. But you know what I love about the story of Nehemiah? There's really not any kind of supernatural act, and yet it's still a miracle. Like, it's not like God just showed up one day and Nehemiah spoke a word and suddenly the walls were built, like reverse Jericho. You know what I'm saying? Like, instead of falling down, they were just supernaturally. No, you don't see that. But it's still a miracle. What is the miracle? The miracle is a normal guy like Nehemiah experiencing the calling and the assignment of God and being faithful to it until completion. And God was with him in the middle of that. See, sometimes we hear about these supernatural miracles, and I believe God can do that. I'm still believing that the prayers we prayed during the miracle series we're going to hear more of those miracles happen and more of those prayers answered. How many believe that, right? But sometimes we get in our mind, well, I don't know if God could do that for me or whatever. But I'm telling you, every one of us can be Nehemiah. Just normal men and women who are faithful to the calling of God on our lives. That even in those moments where we feel discouraged, even in those moments where there's distractions all around us, even in those moments where people are coming against us and trying to discredit us, or in those temptations where it would be easy to discredit ourselves, in those moments when we're like sitting on the side of the bathtub like I was, crying and going, I don't know if I can do it anymore. But we get up, we put our clothes on, we comb our hair and we brush our teeth, and we go to the office one more day. We go to the neighborhood one more day. We get up and we lead our family one more day. We may be discouraged. We may be tired. It may be distractions all around us. The enemy may be doing everything to try to come against us, but we have decided, I will not quit on my calling. I believe God's looking for some Nehemiahs like that. In fact, he has given us a promise if we'll be that kind of person. In Galatians 6:9, it says, if we just don't grow weary in doing good at the proper time, you'll reap a harvest if you just don't give up. Well, Pastor, when's the proper time? I don't know. For Nehemiah, the proper time was 52 days. Pretty cool, right? Some of you are going, man, I need my thing to happen in 52 days. Some of you going, 52 weeks would be good, you know? I mean, some of you going, I've been 52 years waiting on this thing to happen. I don't know when the proper time is. But I know the promise is this. If you don't grow weary in doing good, if you don't get discouraged, if you don't get distracted, if you don't get discredited and disqualified along the way, come on, guess what? In the proper time, in God's time, when that time is right, and his timing is always perfect. We don't know his timing, but he knows, come on, and in the perfect time, you will reap the harvest if you just don't quit. If you wake up every morning and you say, God, I'm going to follow the calling that you have for me today. God, I'm going to follow the assignment. And no matter what the obstacles, and no matter what the struggle, and no matter what the problem, I have made a decision that I will follow you to the end, that when the end comes, come on, God is faithful. We already talked about you can trust him. And his promise is if you just don't give up, there is harvest that's coming for you. So don't quit on your call.
Thank you for joining us online today. Make sure and hit subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for more notifications. We can't wait to engage with you this week.